Man, the leveling experience on Horde, people talk trash about it. They talk trash about how boring it is. And from a certain perspective, it is more boring compared to the Alliance, but the leveling experience on Horde is way better than the leveling experience on Alliance to me. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Serialized. I'm your host, Kino, and I'm joined by a content creator who I'm a big fan of. If you've followed any of my random live streams I do, then you'll know that I'm actually a classic WoW player. I love the game. I love all things World of Warcraft, but especially classic. And I'm joined by one of my favorite classic content creators, Jediwarlock. How you doing today, Jedi?
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'd love it if you could just intro yourself about like who you are, what you do on YouTube, what your content's about.
Yeah, for sure. So my channel focuses mainly on classic WoW and especially the lore and story side of things. So whether that's, explaining the lore of one particular zone or a quest line, or especially one of my favorite things is going into more of the deep lore of the game and maybe, on occasion adding in some lore theories and speculations to that as well. I've been playing the game for a while, and so just being able to synthesize a lot of different information from different parts of the game and, kind of put that all together into a theory or an idea that, maybe folks haven't noticed before is one of my favorite parts of the game and of my channel. So, yeah, that's what I've been all about on my channel for the last couple of years. And, yeah, still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I love what you're doing on the channel. I've always been fascinated about the zone, like you said, zone by zone lore or storylines they do because there's a lot of World of Warcraft content creators who talk about like the overarching lore, right? About the latest expansion, the main storyline, or even stuff in classic about like Ragnaros or Onyxia or any of that type of stuff. But like no one really talks about the individual storylines that happen in zones, besides the obvious ones like the Defias, right, in Westfall, or some of the other storylines. But the more you play WoW, the more you realize just how many details are there, even in like the individual like one-off quests that you're doing while you're leveling. And most people don't even read them, but if you actually read what they're talking about, you'll notice these connections between zones and stuff like that. One of the great ones I always love is in Stranglethorn Vale, there's a storyline about a troll called Zanzel who's like mind controlling people and raising the dead. But it's not just like Stranglethorn, right? In Westfall, there's like zombies that are being controlled by him. In the Barrens, it's part of like the rogue class quests that go on both factions. And I was just like, the first time I played a rogue and I actually like read the quest text there, and I was like, oh my god, this random little mob from Stranglethorn, who again, you do some quests to around this guy and his zombies and stuff like that, but like no one really pays attention to him, right? It's not like one of the major villains of the Warcraft universe. But if you're paying attention, you're like, oh wow, there's fingerprints spread across the world about this random little NPC that doesn't even have a raid or a dungeon dedicated to him specifically.
Absolutely. No, that's one of my favorite examples as well. And I think it's really cool how, like you said, there's kind of different, I almost think about it like, concentric circles or something when you're thinking about the lore, right? It's like you have these big overarching themes and narratives, and then maybe you zoom into, one zone or region that has its own conflict going on or something like that. And then as you're saying, right, it's like here's one character, here's one little subplot going on that might only have one mention or one appearance. But then, as you said, right, there's often little details hidden in other places that refer back to that. And as you said, I like how you brought up the rogue example because I think that's one of the coolest parts about rogues. And I would even say warlocks kind of play into that as well, being a little bit more sneaky, right? A little bit more in the shadows. You get kind of a different dimension than or working on the class quests or the class adventures, you get to see a different dimension compared to some of the more kind of by the books adventures in the game. And so yeah, it totally recontextualizes or adds on to some of the other stories that you get to see, which is really cool.
I think all the classes have some kind of unique stuff that only they get to see, right? Like warriors get like the island off of barons, where they go and learn, their defensive stance, whatever. Or and so every class has some things that are kind of unique to them. But I think, like you said, those two classes, rogues, warlocks, to a lesser extent, some things like maybe mages and stuff, they really have, I think, very fun quest lines and fun unique things, and that's one of the things I love about classic is that, like, not everyone gets to see everything, right? Like, you have stuff that only this class is going to see, and it's not always huge stuff, but it makes me want to play through all the classes just to see what unique things are part of this class that I didn't get to experience on my main. I wanted to ask you, with the name Jedi Warlock, are you like a warlock main?
That's a really good question. Short answer, yes. Way back when, when I was first getting my first account, my first characters, when I was very, very young, I believe my very, very first character was named Jedi Knight just because I was into Star Wars at the time, growing up with that. But then I believe it was my second main character. I think Jedi Knight was a mage, and so when I switched to Warlock, I said, "Hey, why don't we get Jedi Warlock as kind of the new name?" And that character became my main for quite a while. And so that was just me playing on private servers way back when I was growing up, and so that name just kind of stuck since then. And then, of course, when I went on to create the channel, that was kind of my most solid digital identity. And so that's what I went with for the channel. But yeah, it's always funny, when I moved from private servers to, relatively more recently trying out real WoW on real servers, meeting people, doing the guild, all that stuff. I didn't actually realize that the naming convention of WoW characters is often to put your online name and followed by the class, right? It's like, oh, I'm, David Warrior or whatever it is, right? And so I always thought it was funny. Like people are always like, they just call me like Jedi for shorthand, which is fine. And obviously I can work with that. But it's funny because, you know, the term Jedi Warlock has always been kind of like one singular term. And I didn't realize that a lot of the times putting the class at the end is kind of its own separate suffix. But yeah, just kind of a funny little naming convention.
I feel the same way. Like, when I started this channel, like Pure Kino, which is my main channel, obviously, that's a well known like meme, about like high quality television shows and movies. People call it like, oh, this is pure Kino here. And so I just
Oh
named the
yeah.
channel that because I was talking about shows and movies I liked. And then that sort of just evolved to be my name. I kind of I don't regret it now, but I kind of wish I had picked something a little bit more like anthropomorphized. I go by Kino just as like, okay, that was I don't want to go by Pure. That's kind of weird. But it's weird how, like, when you're getting started, you don't really think about how the moniker is going to stick or not, just because you're like, you don't know whether it's going to take off or anyone's going to, even notice what you're doing. So you just kind of
hmm
name it whatever. But it becomes your identity to an extent. Like I said, you're now Jedi to a lot of people. I'm now Kino to a lot of people. It's how it goes.
Yeah, it's kind of how the community takes your brand or your image and kind of works with it. So it's
For
fun.
sure.
It's all
Yeah.
good.
No, it's interesting you said you got your start on private servers, because I got my official start on the real servers. I think I joined. It was the tail end of Burning Crusade. Was when I first started playing. Like, Wrath had already been announced. I didn't even make it to Outland by the time Wrath came out. I made it to like my 50s, enough to get a Death Knight when Wrath came out. But I years later, I stopped playing the game, and then I came back for vanilla private servers. I don't know how that came on my radar, but I was like, oh, this is like the old version of the game. I'll check this out and see what it's about. And I that's where I fell in love with classic specifically. Like, it is. I don't hate retail. There's a lot of cool stuff in retail, and I'll play through retail every now and again. But man, is the slower pace of classic so much better at immersing you in the world. I know it's kind of like a meme at this point about how much classic players like glaze the game, but I just think that slow paced journey to get to 60 just gives you so much more time to pay attention to stuff. Like I said, the storylines we noticed before about like very few players in retail read the quests, just like in classic, very few players read it either. But you're just zooming through the content, right? You're just smashing through everything. But you're
Yeah.
spending so much time in classic fighting mobs. The combat is so slow. You're taking like a minute or two to fight one single mob. You end up kind of noticing things like, oh, their name. Oh, this is
Mhm.
a Zanzil controlled zombie or something. You know, it's like I noticed that from this other playthrough I did or whatever. It's like you notice the things more compared to when you're just smashing through everything. And I think that's for a lot of people that's really the appeal of classic. What was it that appealed to you when you were first playing?
I mean, I think for me, I mean, I was pretty young. I wasn't even a teenager when I'd first started. This was back in 2010, 2011. My dad was the one who first introduced it to me. And at the start it was like, oh, you want to take the controls, get me on a flight path back to town, or you want to help me with one quest while I'm making dinner, just kind of very, very kind of slow baby steps. But then on it was Christmas of 2011. Again, still talking private servers. My dad actually got me my own account, and he let me make my own character. And so I was like, okay, this is the real deal. Now I can be, Jedi Knight into Jedi Warlock and all of that. And really, I just think it was kind of my first. I mean, not like adult game, right? But more expansive, like real video game that wasn't like a kid's app or something, And so, that just kind of stood out to me from the very beginning. I mean, so many things, just the fantasy vibe, open world. I was a big reader growing up. And so just having all this lore and text and quests and like all of this stuff to piece through, I was really into that at the time and still am, obviously. But I think just the blend of everything going on and it being such a novel experience, right? I had never played an MMO before. My PC game library was pretty limited to begin with. And so just having that whole dimension kind of open up, it's like, well, at the time, it's like, oh man, this is like the only really, really cool big game that I have access to. And then even, all these years later, it's like, oh, well, I'm glad I enjoyed it at the time because it's still awesome.
I first got introduced to WoW through Warcraft 3. My grandpa, he bought me 2 games. I don't know how he knew to buy those because my grandpa, he's an older guy, not really into video games, but he must have gone to like GameStop or something and asked the employees or something what to get because he bought me 2 games. He bought me Warcraft 3 and he bought me Diablo 2, I think it was. And I don't know if you know the cover of Diablo 2, but it's like this fiery demon skull face on it, and it scared the
Yeah.
shit out of me when I was a kid. And so I never played it. I stuck it in a drawer, shut it. I never wanted to look at it. It scared me to death. But the cover of Warcraft 3 was it was Thrall the orc, and I was like, that's not as scary. So I played that, and I loved the game. I love the storytelling of it's a very cinematic game. It's a very
Hmm.
much about it's not just the RTS elements, it's about like the story that goes through it. And then later on, my friends were like, "Oh, you should check out World of Warcraft." And I mean, I think I'd heard about it, but I never like checked it out. Had to like beg my parents for a game subscription. They were like, "What the hell is it costs $15 a month? What the hell is this?" They would buy
Hmm.
me video games, but it was like, you're one and done. Like this, you're gonna sign me up for a monthly thing. But after enough begging, they finally did it. And I think I'm curious, when you started, were you Alliance or Horde?
I was Alliance all the way. I mean, I've made lots of
Is
videos
that still
on.
where your heart is, the Alliance?
I think in my heart, yes. I mean, I really don't think anything can top that original human experience. You got what, Elwyn through Duskwood, basically, and I've made videos aplenty on that before, and I think that's still probably my favorite. But I've been branching out, checking out the Horde, checking out the cool storylines. So yeah, I'm trying to be I'm trying to be more neutral, as I've gained more experience and I've tried more characters in the game. But
I'll say this too. When I started,
yeah.
I was Alliance, and I was like diehard Alliance. That was back in the day when people actually cared about the faction differences. Like in retail now, no one cares whether you
Hmm.
play Alliance or Horde. But back then it was
Yeah.
like, no, 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 no. The Alliance, like if you're a Horde, I'm not friends with you in real life too. But
Yeah.
you know, playing on private servers, and then when the classic came out and playing the two sides, I started Alliance at first, and I have like a 60 Alliance. but I decided to level Horde for once, and I was like, man, the leveling experience on Horde, people talk trash about it. They talk trash about how boring it is. And from a certain perspective, it is more boring compared to the Alliance, but the leveling experience on Horde is way better than the leveling experience on Alliance to me. Like, and talking like zone to zone, like how the quests flow, how you kind of go through them and do them. And the great example I always point out is Stranglethorn. You're given these quests to like from Hemet Nessiwary to go kill the different, raptors, tigers,
Oh
jaguars
yeah.
in the progressive rent wing, right? The Horde have secondary quests on top of that to go get resources from those very same mobs. So you're
Oh
double
wow.
dipping on the quests as you go through them. The same thing's true of the trolls you go through. I'm just like, Stranglethorn is probably the biggest example for me of just how much better the Horde have it in terms of leveling. Like Alliance, you have that one camp at the top of the zone that doesn't even have a flight path, so you have to run your character all the way
Yep.
there and back, and you ain't gonna have a mount at level
Mm-hmm.
30 when you go there.
It's a
Horde have
lot
a
of
flight
walking.
path. Horde have a flight path in the middle and Booty Bay, and they have zeppelins that go back and forth to both capital cities. It's like absurd how better the experience is in that zone specifically than any other for Horde compared to Alliance.
No, that's definitely fair. I think Horde definitely has its moments and its advantages. And while I may have more experience with the Alliance and how the knowing what I do now, it's like I can make it pretty efficient and I can work with it just after finding everything out over so many years. But no, I agree. If I gave Horde more of a shot, leveled some more characters, I'm sure I'd appreciate all the benefits they have to offer.
But both, I mean, like I said, both factions have really cool, stuff that both sides have going on here. Now, I'm curious though, how did you get started making videos? Because, I'm a big fan of your channel. I watch a lot of your videos. I think your oldest stuff was like from like 5 years ago. How did you first get to the point of like, yeah, I'm gonna make YouTube videos about World of Warcraft?
That's a great question. I think the pandemic in 2020 is honestly what kind of got the ball rolling. During the pandemic, during that spring and summer, that was right when I was graduating high school. And so, of course, I was home all summer waiting for college. And so, what game do I finally try? I try Warcraft 3. And that really, as I'm sure you know, right, it takes that storytelling of the Warcraft universe to that next level, right? Because you're not experiencing it just from that MMO perspective. It's a lot more scripted, right? It's a lot more, hey, here's the actual saga of what's happening in the world over these, months or years of time. And so that I think was really cool to experience. I don't know why I had waited so long because I've played other Blizzard games, before then. I was big into Overwatch in high school, but I just never checked out Warcraft 3. And then I finally try it out and I'm like, oh man, this reframes so much of what you see in WoW, right? Because Warcraft 3 is leading right up to what you're seeing as you walk around in WoW. And so I just thought that was super cool. And so that really kind of got my lore and story brain going. And throughout high school, I'd been building up, a nice little collection of those Brady Games strategy guides. You've probably seen them before. And so, just from a lore perspective, I'd also been into those and buying them off of eBay and having my little lore library. And so, kind of that combined with trying Warcraft 3. And then I'm in college and all my lectures are online and I'm stuck in my dorm and, all of these compounding factors. I'm like, I got to do something. I got to kind of have an outlet that's not just turning in my online homework and staring out my window. And so I was finally like, let's try YouTube. I like WoW. I like video games. Let's see what we can do here. And really, for the first 9 months or year of the channel, I mean, you can still go back. You can go back and see. I mean, it's basically just hour long gameplay videos, right? It's like no talking, no nothing. I'm just posting my gaming out there for whoever wants to look at it. And then after doing that, playing a couple games, kind of growing my confidence in, presenting content, I guess you could call it. I'm finally like, okay, now I can turn on my mic, let's start talking a little bit. Oh man, let's, I have more of these complex thoughts. Let's write a script and see how that goes. And so, I've made it a point not to go back and like reset the channel or try to like get rid of stuff from a long time ago, because I'm like, I kind of want this to be a history, right? It's like, here's where I was at in 2020, and now here I am, making these big lore episodes and theories, on a pretty regular basis. And so it's been a really fun journey. But yeah, COVID is kind of what kick started the whole thing. It's like, I need something else to do. Let's try YouTube.
That's so funny, like, because that is literally my story too, it's like I
Oh yeah.
was it sounds like I'm a little older than you because I was out of college and I was working, when COVID first happened, but obviously when everything shut down, economy shut down, I was out of a job at that point, and I had nothing to do either, and I was like, "Let's just give YouTube a shot, it's a fun little thing to do." I don't think anyone's ever gonna watch these, but I like talking about shows and movies and stuff, big passion of mine. Ended up making some videos, and eventually I stumbled upon, like, I decided to make a Sopranos video. I've always been a huge fan of the show, and funny enough, when we were talking, you revealed that you were a fan of the show too, and I was like, what a small world it is that, again, two people have. I mean, if you just looked at our channels, you wouldn't think that, like, oh, this guy likes Sopranos, oh, this guy likes classic WoW. But again, it's a small world, and there's a lot of crossover appeal between stuff. But yeah, I was just
Yeah.
like, I love this show. Let's make some videos up on it, and other people wanted to watch it. And it's been a journey since then. So yeah, it's cool. And like I said, like I said, have done a great job. I think that your content, especially digging into some of these more niche things. I always think it's better to go more niche than more general. Because again, there's a million people who talk about, like, what is the latest lore about, like, World of Warcraft Midnight or anything like that. But there's not a lot of people talking about, hey, what's the storyline behind, in Duskwood, or this cave over here. But there is material there. It is like,
It's like untapped potential.
yes, the people who
Mhm.
made this game, they put a lot of detail into here that the game, and I love so much about classic, this game does not shove it in your face. Modern WoW, they make sure you know what the story is. They make sure it's front and center. They're gonna auto play a cinematic when you get to a certain point. You are gonna talk to these people. They're gonna chat with you as you're flying through. And fair to them. Retail is still a good game in a lot of ways, but there is so much that you don't have to see, right? And no one's going to force you to go look into any of this stuff, but if you do, you're going to find
Mhm.
some cool stuff, man. It's a really dense game that there's a lot to explore. And again, the fact that it's so slow encourages you to kind of just pay attention to the surroundings. Like, hey, what is this weird crystal over here? What is this? What are these ruins? Like, who built these ruins here? There is an actual story if you
Yeah.
pay attention, but they're not going to shove it down your throat the way they do in the modern game.
Yeah, it's a lot more, subtle and kind of open-ended. I mean, you can go 1 to 60 basically knowing nothing if you don't read any of the quest text or you're not paying attention. If you're a dungeon spammer or something like that, it's like, "Oh, I made it to 60." It's like, "All right, well, what did you get out of it? What did you learn?" Versus "Oh, I'm going to read every quest. I'm going to explore the map fully in all of these different places. I'm going to try and look into it." I mean, it's like you said, right? It's kind of whatever you put into it, you're going to get out of it, compared to retail being, here's what you're getting kind of by default. Which, pros and cons, right? I'm sure retail has, it's goods and bads. I myself am not a retail player. I do still sometimes keep up with the announcements and some of the modern lore, just because it is fascinating to see what directions they do go in. And I get comments a lot of the time that's like, "Oh, in this modern expansion, they actually did add to this," and I'm like, "Oh, well, that's awesome. Like that's good to hear where they decided to take it in the future." But as you know, I'm classic all the way.
Yeah, for sure.
But
And it's also, though, it's annoying because sometimes when you're talking about this old lore, people are like, "Oh, no, no, no! In the modern game, in retail, they say what happened here," and I'm like, that has nothing to do with classic, right? The story is the story
yeah,
in this game. Like, you can't say that, like, oh, the jailer was the reason why that this explains this because of the jailer or something. It's like they did not know when they made this game what any of that stuff in the future was. That was modern new writers and stuff, for better and worse, with their modern story, building off of what they did in the
Completely.
foundation here, but it doesn't change the foundation, right? It's like, I mean, there is a consideration for stuff like the Burning Crusade and Wrath because they had some of that stuff saved. You know, Chris Metzen had some of that
Mhm.
stuff saved, and they were just waiting to bring it out for the right time. But
For
anything
sure.
beyond there, I'm like, this is a completely different version of the game. It's like it doesn't affect the old stuff. And I think that's true of like
Mhm.
Sopranos too. It's like the Many Saints does not override the canon of the original series. That's a way later
Right.
invention that's building off of the existing stuff. And we can talk about it. You know, it might be interesting to talk about it, but you know, you can't say that like, oh, this is the answer because a future version of the game announced it. It's like, no, 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 no. We got to go off of what's in the actual old school version of the game.
Completely. No, I completely agree. And I think, yeah, for me, it's you know what we call like the original trilogy, right? It's like I'll talk classic mostly. I'll bring in Burning Crusade. I've made a couple of videos on that recently. I'll bring in Wrath of the Lich King, and I do have a soft spot for Wrath because that's what the private servers I grew up on were all based around, right? So kind of those original three pieces, I think, are a nice little contained unit. And then beyond that, I mean, you get into Cataclysm and beyond. Well, the old world's gone now. That those 5, 6 years of lore are totally, or I should say, mostly overwritten, right? And in many cases, there's a lot of examples where they go back and sort of soft retcon, or like you said, like add on in a different way, right? Which it was an interesting direction to go, right? It's like, oh, this boss that we defeated in Duskwood, it's like, oh well, you actually defeated the fake version, or oh, he had a soul stone and he's back, or any number of those things. And it's like, however, you got to explain the lore to get to this new version, sure. But yeah, yeah, for me, it's not my go-to part of the lore for sure.
I agree. And I think that also they like to recontextualize stuff in the modern game, the old
Hmm.
stuff. They tend to be like, this is how this character appeared back then, but we since decided, you know, there's a different interpretation of the character. So, like, Illidan's a great example of that, right? He's like a straight up bad guy throughout Burning Crusade. And then they're like, okay, no, 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 wait, he was misunderstood. We didn't understand Illidan's plan in Legion. And you know, a lot of people like Legion. It's a great expansion and they like Illidan or whatever, but it's you gotta take it for what it's worth.
Hmm.
Now I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite like zone storylines or you know quest storylines or anything like that? Like what are the like your kind of go to like man, I really enjoy what they did here.
I think I'll give you two categories of answers, and maybe I can give you a couple examples of each. And I think this is probably reflected in maybe some of the things I focus on the channel, depending on what you look at. But for me, the main two are kind of the overarching slow burn narratives. And then the second category would be, the storylines that really get into like the human or like personal element. Because I both think they have very interesting applications in an MMO space. So I'll start with the first one, right? Overarching, kind of subtle or niche or like slow burn stories. And that's not to say they have to stay niche, but just things that start off very subtle, right? You could include, the Defias leading into the Onyxia storyline, right? I mean, the Defias isn't really subtle at the beginning, right? Oh, we have these bandits, we have Van Cleef. It's a very obvious threat, but then you get into your 30s, 40s, beyond, getting closer to max level. Oh man, we have this whole conspiracy that you really never would have seen at the very start of the game. It kind of is unveiled over time. I would say the other great example that I think I made a video last summer on was the Silithid, right? You have these insects showing up and burrowing up from the barrens. You have a little colony of them in the Thousand Needles, right, on the Shimmering Flats, right? And you're discovering these little pockets of infestation, and then that all builds up to the big threat of the Silithid and Encourage and all of that. So I would say that I think is really cool because it highlights how in an MMO you're going from early zones to mid game zones to late game zones very, very slowly, you're probably doing a lot of stuff in between those steps. But if you're paying attention, it all kind of slowly builds up and you get that sense of understanding when it finally clicks. It's like, oh man, we made it to Silithus. Here's where the epicenter of all these bugs are at, right? So that's kind of a fun reveal. And then I would say from the other perspective, the more human element, I don't know. It's just interesting how a game from 2004 with a couple of paragraphs of text and maybe like a single NPC animation, right, can just evoke emotions in the player. One of the my favorite examples is the Shady Rest Inn, which I will admit was never fully finished, I believe, until the Burning Crusade when they added that little expansion to the zone. But regardless, that's a human story, right? That's one guy setting up an inn, out in the frontier lands, out in the swamp, and that's the whole story of the inn burning down. What happened to his family? What happened to the inn? Piecing that all together, and then at the very end, uh, from what I remember, right at the very end, you have the family of the inn's owner. You actually get to interact with their spirits and kind of help them find rest. And so anything like that, really just kind of speaks to the quality of the writing. It's like, oh, the writers actually took the time to include these smaller stories about the humans or whoever, right? Whatever race we're talking about, the people in this world, not just, orcs versus humans fighting or the night elves versus whoever, right? It's not just war and battles and fighting enemies, it's also helping out these people. I would also say the story of Morgan Lattimore, if you're familiar with that, in Duskwood. That's another great one. How at the very end you talk with the daughter, and then you go and claim his sword at the grave and all that stuff. I mean, just little moments like that. And there are so many others as well. But those just stick with you. It's like, oh, this isn't go kill 10 gnolls and come talk to me afterwards. This is a little bit more special. So those are some of the ones that speak to me most. What about you? What kind of stands out to you from a quest or a story standpoint?
I like the two categories you put it in. I mean, like that first category I talked before. I really like the Zanzel thing just because he's not a raid boss. He's not a dungeon boss. There's nothing in the game that's like makes a set piece out of this character, but there's his fingerprints are across the two continents. Like there's stuff going on here. You even later on rescue or I don't remember how the storyline plays out because it's you have to do an elite quest and I usually skip it because it's hard, but Vol'jin's son is like captured by this guy and there's a whole thing about it. But that's a cool one just because I like this stuff that's subtle. I like the stuff that doesn't get in your face. Like the Defias is really cool, but it ends in a dungeon, right? It's like it's very clearly setting up this dungeon. The Scarlet Crusade's really cool, but it's very clearly setting up Scarlet Crusade dungeons. The stuff that doesn't end in a dungeon or a raid and something I think is honestly more special just because it's not a set piece they're designing around because that's all retail is to me is like everything is just getting you ready for the big set piece raid or set piece dungeon they're trying to do, and we've lost a lot of this kind of subtle storytelling. Shady Rest End's another great one because it's one of those things like you said, I think it's unfinished. I don't think they ever directly tell you what happened, but I think it's the Grim Totem that burned that place down. And that's a cool faction too, because it's like, oh, there's Tauren who are evil. The Tauren are all good that we experience. There's no evil Tauren, but there's actually it's cool how they make faction like dark factions out of some of the people who you at first kind of just associate with good people. There's actually some bad ones out there. One that really stands out to me is for kind of a weird reason is Mancrick's wife in the Barrens, like this thing that's become a meme, right? Obviously in the Barrens chat, everyone knows the jokes about Mancrick's wife and the Chuck Norris jokes and all this stuff. It's kind of weird, but I read this it was a role play on the forum. It was a choose your own adventure style role play on the World of Warcraft forums back in the day. It was a very famous one. It was called You Awaken in Razor Hill. And people would reply to the OP and they would tell the OP what they wanted the character to do, and then slowly through that, it was this adventure that kind of unfolded, and it actually revolved around Mankirk's wife to an extent, and it was actually archived. I'll post a link in the description of this video, but it was archived on Tumblr after it got taken down. But it became like one of the most famous role play stories from the forums. So much so that in Wrath of the Lich King, they made an NPC off of the character from that story. His name is Ted Nugent. It was a joke about the rock star Ted Nugent. It's like Ted Nug or something in the game, but he walks around Razor Hill off of that story. But it was cool just because it's like you said, that human angle. Like, everyone just makes a meme out of the fact that this guy's wife died, but someone actually went to the effort of actually writing a story around who this girl was who died, this female orc who died. It actually is kind of a it's a funny story in a lot of ways because it's, again, everyone was like, take your clothes off, get naked, and the author would respond to it and have the character do it or whatever. But he actually wrote a kind of a compelling story about who this woman was, and you sometimes kind of forget because of the video game angle that within the narrative, these are like actual real people who have lives, and they often get them destroyed by the Warcraft aspect of the game. And so yeah, I think that there's a lot of cool little stuff in the game that you can pay attention to if you care to, or like you said, you can just dungeon spam your way to 60. At the end of the day, your adventure is your adventure, right? Like, no one can tell you how to experience the game. It's whatever enjoyment you get out of it is fine for you. But there's a lot of different ways to experience the game, and I think that's a really cool aspect of World of Warcraft. You can be whoever you want to be to an extent.
I do want to ask. I'm curious. Speaking of different play styles and different ways of approaching it, have you ever tried hardcore classic?
I
And if
wanted
so,
to
what are
bring
your
that up
thoughts
with
on
you because
that?
I saw your hardcore video, which was amazing, by the way.
Thanks, man.
Just the best ending possible for a hardcore video. Yeah, I've been playing it. I've never made it to 60 before. I The highest I've made it, I think, is like to mid 20s, and then like you said, you
Ah,
make a stupid mistake and you get your character killed, and you
mm-hmm.
get frustrated and don't play again for a while. But I
Yep.
love the game. I think hardcore, and until Classic Plus is released, I think hardcore is the best thing to ever happen to Classic. I think it gives the game so much more life, both from a like a streaming perspective, like content creator perspective, because obviously Classic is a boring game in a lot of ways, right? It's very slow combat, not a lot going on, and when death is not an impedance, there's really no tension, right? You can die as many times as you want. The worst thing that's going to happen is your gear is going to break and you got to pay for the repair costs or something. There's not any real stakes towards leveling, which is great in a lot of ways because it's very easy to get into. I'm not a great gamer myself, so I like easy games I can play. But that aspect of you have one life, you need to not die, really, really makes the world engaging in a way that even I think Classic does a great job of because of the slow paced nature, it incentivizes you to learn stuff. Like, you learn what abilities the enemies do. Oh, this enemy heals. I need to interrupt it. Oh, this enemy does whatever. I need
Mm-hmm.
to deal with that. Hardcore just amplifies that by 10, and it really makes you pay attention to what's going on, makes you go slower, or you die. And I think that it's breathed so much life into the game that I don't think people would still, if it was just era this whole time, I don't think people would still be streaming it. I don't think people would still be playing it. I mean, they play it for fun, but like content creators wouldn't have a reason to be like, yeah, this is my 12th level 60. It's there's no tension there. But now that there's a tension of, oh, this guy could die at any moment, people are interested in watching that type of stuff. So I think it's amazing. How about you?
No, I totally agree. And, I liked watching it for a while. I thought it was a cool concept. But for a long time, I refused to get into it because I was just like, oh man, these stakes are so high. Like, I don't know if I'm cut out for it. I am not, a very high caliber player. I'm not a raider or anything. I don't even know, all the metas for spells and all of that. And so, for a long time, I was just a spectator. And then I believe it was a little more than a year ago now. I was like, I think I'll give this a shot and we'll see what happens. A couple failed attempts, probably more than a couple, but we got there eventually. And now I am actually just starting on the Horde side. I'm going to try to do Horde 60 hardcore as well. So, a new high stakes adventure on the horizon. But yeah, yeah, I agree. And it's in my experience, maybe this isn't everybody, but I feel like on hardcore, you have some of the most helpful and some of the most engaging communities, because there's memes all over the place about like, oh, toxic players, toxic servers, people not being helpful. But I feel like in hardcore, the vast majority of examples that I've had, it's like, oh, that person right there, they saw I was in trouble and they were going to help me out, or I see a person in trouble, I'm going to try and help them out, just because you have that shared sense of dread of, oh man, I don't want something bad to happen to either one of us. And so I just feel like that's been really cool, because there can be a lot of negativity, and so I feel like that hardcore element can, at least in some cases, push back against that. It's like, we're actually all here for the same reason. We're all trying to push to 60 despite all these really annoying mechanics or all of these mistakes that can happen. Let's see what we can make happen. And so I don't know. I just thought that the community aspect on hardcore is also something really cool to check out.
No, I agree. You know what's funny though? My first hardcore character died because I was helping someone. I was a dwarf priest,
Oh yeah.
and it was in Red Ridge, and this person had pulled like too many gnolls, and I healed them, but it pulled them onto me, and I couldn't get away, and I died.
Yeah.
I flipped out afterwards, and I swore to myself I would never help another player. But no, I think you're right though that the thing that made WoW toxic when it first the re-release of Classic, and I'm sure probably original too, but I didn't get high enough in the original to ever know that or not. The other players are your competition in the regular game, right? When the Classic first came out, it was like, oh, they're my competition to get the gear, they're my competition to get the quest mob or whatever. So you almost had like this antagonistic relationship because there's so many players that it's like you didn't really need to make friends with anyone. There's always going to be more players you could group with. But with
Right.
hardcore, because there's no PvP and because every player who dies is one less player you could potentially like group up with and do stuff with, you're incentivized to care about them more. It's like this person, I might do something with them later. People have to survive to make it to the end to do group content with if you want to do group content. So yeah, I think
Hmm.
you're right. I think that again, hardcore has reduced a lot of that negativity, and again, because it's so slow, everyone's just like, there's no point in rushing. Remember back in the original release, people were like, get to 60 as fast as possible so we can get to raid, do dungeon spamming, all that stuff. And this one is like, it doesn't matter. Like, just go slow. Like, you're gonna die if you go too quickly. So I think people are incentivized to just chill out and not just go crazy toxic and get mad when people are not clearing the dungeon as fast as they want or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
That was my least favorite aspect of the original Classic run. But I wanted to talk briefly before we kind of end things here. Classic Plus is presumably on the horizon. It seems like very likely that that's the direction that Blizzard's going to go, and everyone's hoping that they'll make some kind of announcement at BlizzCon in November. What are your thoughts about Classic Plus? Like, what direction would you like to see them go? Obviously, we got a version of Classic Plus in Season of Discovery, which was a very enjoyable game mode. I really liked Season of Discovery, but where, from your perspective, is obviously someone who covers a lot of the more niche aspects of the lore, this is presumably where they would draw stuff from to add new content. We saw that in Season
Hmm.
Discovery. They expanded some of like the Karazhan crypts, Mana Rock Coven, all or not Mana Rock Coven, like Demonfall Cavern, all this type of stuff that's
Yeah.
like small storylines in the world that they found a place to make content out of. Where do you think the game should go with that? Like, what are the kind of the top things you'd like to see out of Classic Plus?
Oh man, that's a loaded question, and I think there's a lot to that, but I'll try and just say what I can with the time that we have. I think announcement imminent for sure. If you've been following the leaks, the information, I think that's the direction they're heading. I'll be at BlizzCon this year, and so hopefully I'll have a front row seat to, well, maybe not front row, but have a day one look at what's going on there. So that'll be pretty cool. In terms of Season of Discovery, that was actually my first time playing official Blizzard WoW. That was actually the straw that finally broke, or that's what really pushed me over the edge to say, you know what, new adventure on Classic Azeroth. Let's go check it out. And so that's been almost 3 years now. So that's where I had first jumped into real live servers. I think you'd probably agree that, Season of Discovery was some goods and then maybe some not so goods, right? Some things really, really made the community happy. It's like, oh, these new stories, this mechanic, that mechanic, versus, oh, this kind of missed the mark. And, I don't want to, play the Blood Moon event for another 6 months or whatever, right? Just throwing things out there. And so I think for me, and I think I'll probably have to distill my thoughts on this and make a video on it at some point, but I think the main word for me, and maybe other people too, is like hesitancy, or being hesitant about it. Just because I think, like we were talking about at the very beginning, right? It's not the same writers, it's not the same designers, right? It's not the same developers. And so it'll be very interesting to see that team looking at original Classic, what they're able to pull from that and extend, right? And we saw a little bit of that in Sod. And I was like, okay, here's this toolbox of new stuff that's supposed to fit in the vanilla world. And I think some of that was good, some of that was less good. And so I think the hesitancy comes into play where it's like, well, going from Sod to Classic Plus, or whatever name they call it, what parts of that toolbox are they going to put in, and what parts of the toolbox are they going to leave out forever? And so I think that's what I'm thinking a lot about is, just from a gameplay aspect, what pieces of Season of Discovery are they going to keep or change? Which ones are they going to shelve? And which ones, or they're going to make new stuff, obviously. From a lore perspective, I think, kind of like you were saying, the smaller stories, the little additions that make, I don't know if this is a term or not, I'll just make it up right now. If it makes vanilla sense, that's the thing that they need to keep in mind. Like, oh, if there's an unfinished quest line that leads to this very natural conclusion that was never added, add that in, right? The stepping stones are all there. But I think if, you see, or maybe there's no basis and you're adding in a bunch of new quest lines, you're adding things that give you a nice little cheeky hint to something in retail, and you're like trying to put this in the Classic space. It's like, that doesn't really do it for me, right? Because it's supposed to be, or at least in my mind, right, it's supposed to be a separate direction. You're not needing to tie it into the retail direction. But so, I don't know. I have a couple ideas in mind that are kind of like my litmus tests for, like, oh, are they going in the right direction with the lore and the story? And one of my main thoughts, and I go back to this example a lot, is the Pirates in Ajara, if you're familiar with that. Like the little pirate group who they have like one quest when there was obviously meant to be much more down in that little coastal hub. And I know that's like oddly hyper specific, but it's just one example that I like to highlight a lot because it's one of the best examples of unfinished content, but we haven't seen anything added to it yet. I think also other private servers that have been doing, Classic Plus recently. And I mean, there's been a whole bunch of drama with the shutdowns and the lawsuits and all of that, Turtle and others. I just think it goes back to that idea of hesitancy. It's like, can Blizzard pull off something that's as engaging and as compelling as Turtle, or insert server that's your favorite in that regard? And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, and if people are going to jump at this next era of WoW. Because on one hand, it's like, oh man, Blizzard's admitting they want to try Classic Plus. Are they going to add in all the things that we want them to add in? What direction are they going to go? I think that's intriguing, and I'll probably check it out. But on the other hand, I also don't think it's going to be the end all be all of Classic Plus. There's going to be custom projects on the side that people like more. Some people, for whatever reason, they're never going to support the official Blizzard version. And that's okay too, right? And so I think you have kind of all these different directions or, maybe timelines if we're using like WoW, lingo or something, right? You have all these different splits in the versions of the game. And so I don't think Classic Plus by Blizzard is going to be the answer to everything, but I do think it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. So I guess as of now, that's kind of my thought. What about you? Are you on board? Are you watching from the sidelines? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm split. Like I'm definitely excited about it. I think that it'll be a big event in the way that Sod was too. And
Mm-hmm.
I think those are good for the community to always be like, okay, there's a reason to come back to WoW. And sometimes the community invents those. Like hardcore, there was this whole like race locked thing where you could only play with your
Yes.
specific race. That was very fun. I did that
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Which one did you join? What team were you?
The dwarf side. I wanted to go
Nice.
dwarf this time around. But there's stuff that's like, oh man, I wish I could be a night elf because I want to play as this, or I want to be human or because I want to play like this. But it's also cool when Blizzard has those official stuff. So again, everyone can come back. Streamers are going to play it. Everyone can participate and be a part of this event. And I think everyone's hopeful that Classic Plus will be this framework from which they can make a version of the game that is always popular. I think the original Classic, vanilla version base game will always be popular. The servers are still lively, not as lively as they were in 2019, but there's still always stuff going
Right.
on there. And
Mm-hmm.
I go back and play those old versions or old servers sometimes. Play hardcore. I really like hardcore now too. But I think everyone's hoping that Classic Plus will be this framework for a version of the game that will last forever because they can keep adding new content. That's the thing that always holds back era is that there's no new content. Eventually, you run out of stuff to do and then you quit.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like you. I think that they had to be careful about the way they do it. My main criticism of Sod was that they really leaned into mechanical complexity the way they do in retail, right? They're making new stuff. It needs to be more difficult than the old stuff, obviously. So make the designs more complicated in terms of mechanics. And I think that's antithetical to Classic in a lot of ways. Classic is not a mechanically challenging game. It is challenging in the
No.
sense of like learning what to do and learning like class composition for your raid, learning how to do some very specific mechanics occasionally, but you don't have to run around a lot, you don't have to click very fast. For a lot of players you can play with one button, and I think that's the appeal for a lot of it. And my worry is that, like, again, stuff like Scarlet Enclave is basically like retail, raids. Like, there's a lot of stuff you got to do. And it's very
Yeah.
difficult, and that's you're losing the appeal of a lot of the boomers, who like to play classic. So I was generally happy with Sod. I think, and I think that's also the reason they did that is because they made the classes very overpowered with the abilities they gave them, which was fun in a way. Don't get me wrong. A lot of the abilities was like, oh my god, this is incredible. I can smash through everything, and there's a power fantasy. But that is also getting away from the classic vibe of like very slow paced combat where you pull more than two mobs, you're probably gonna die.
Right.
And so I my concern is more about the mechanics. I think that the stuff that they did add in terms of the story felt cool to me. Karazhan Crypts was cool and something obvious for them to do, but there was also stuff like Demonfall Canyon, which I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't even think that the writers remembered that. Yeah, this is where Grom Hellscream died. But they made
Mm-hmm.
something interesting out of that side of the world that you pretty much have no reason to go to even in the regular game. There's nothing really going on
Yeah.
over here. So I think they can design cool zones and dungeons and raids that will appeal to people. I mean, they have a laundry list of stuff that people want, like Timber Mall Hold raid. They people want like a
Mm-hmm.
pirate thing, like you said. I think South Seas would be a great direction for them to go to, but in an effort to make the game more interesting, don't go too far into mechanical complexity because then you're going to just become retail at that point. It's just going to be retail with worse graphics.
Yeah.
So, I'm not a big fan of all the new roles they added to classes. it was cool to an extent. They were very creative. Like even retail doesn't have things like rogue tanks or mage healers. So I applaud them for not literally just sticking in retail abilities, which they did, but going beyond that, it was like it showed that there was some creativity. Because the other criticism people have is, the modern WoW team is too lazy to, like, they're just gonna make the most basic easy version so they can cash in on whatever. But it seemed like whoever was doing sod had some passion for the game to go a little bit above and beyond just, adding in Crusader Strike to Paladins or whatever. So
No, I agree. I think they did a lot of good things, and I will say I think like you said, I think the passion is there. I think they are putting, or at least in the Season of Discovery time period, they did have a lot of folks that were wanting to focus on the classic feel and not just import, everything retail into classic. But yeah, we're gonna have to see what happens. It's gonna be interesting. But like you said, yeah, I do think it's cool that they're trying to drum up support as a from the community aspect of it, and I think that'll be cool to see whatever ends up happening.
yeah, maybe when the servers come out, we can play. Although I don't know because I'm a Horde main and you're an Alliance main. We'll have to see how that works out. But I know we're at an hour here. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Again, I know for listeners, this might be kind of a random conversation, but like as you can tell from this, I'm hugely passionate about the game. It's one of the few games I actually play in depth and kind of understand. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this. It was great talking with you. Guys, check out Jediwarlock's channel. I'm going to link it in the description. Really, really fantastic videos if you're into this side of WoW. And there's very few people doing stuff like this. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And any final thoughts you want to leave us with here?
Just wanted to say it's a pleasure you having me on. I appreciate the invite, and yeah, hoping for good things headed into the rest of the year. BlizzCon soon, and then yeah, hopefully more WoW for years to come. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for listening and stay tuned for the next episode of Serialized coming soon.